All right. Thank you everyone for joining. I know some of you, and I don't know some of you. So my name is Sarah. I work at the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, and I run a project called the Southern Vermont Economy Project. And it does many things, but one of the things it does is provide these Knowledge Bite webinars. So it's a webinar once a month. It's on a range of topics from resources to funding opportunities to programs, and it's just supposed to be a kind of a overview of some information that you could really dive pretty deep into, and it's to connect you to the people that do this work. So today we have Tim, who's with the Vermont Geographic Information Center. Did I get that right? I always mess up.
Almost. Vermont Center for Geographical Information.
I was close. Yeah. And yeah, he is going to talk about parcel data, and I'm just going to hand it over to him. Like I said, this is being recorded, so you can watch it again or share with people who are not able to watch it, and take it away. Okay,
so thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for jumping onto this during your lunchtime. Feel free to munch away if you need to. I think I know some of you, but I don't know all of you. So it's a small enough group if you just go around and introduce yourselves and say, what town or where you work with, and maybe one particular thing you do of interest with parcels, just so I get a sense of why you're here.
Great. Let's start with Gordon.
I'm the assessor for the town of Manchester.
Okay.
And I started only a couple of years ago, actually probably about a year and a half ago, truthfully. And I'm working with the map, trying to improve it for Manchester. In fact, I did work this morning, not even remembering that this was scheduled. So.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Val?
Val Amosino. I am a lister in the town of Rupert, have been for 22 years, and I am looking to do more with digital parcel data. We have paper parcel maps, and I would like to be able to do a little more digitally with our townsfolk.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Scott.
Morning, Tim. Scott Tucker, town manager from Wilmington. We're completing a townwide reappraisal, which has been interesting to say the least. We're still finishing up, so we're a little late getting all of our numbers into the state. And we probably will be asking voters to go to a appointed positions for listers this next town meeting. And I haven't seen Sarah in a while, so I thought I'd stop in.
Thanks, Scott. Paul.
I'm Paul Bohosky. I'm a lister in Rockingham. I've been in the position about 2.5 years, and really just to increase my knowledge, I guess, is the reason I signed up.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Helen.
My name is Helen Holt. I'm a lister in the town of Townsend, and I figured the more I know about parcels, the better it'll be.
Sounds good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine McGowan. I'm with the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and I work with the forest products industry. So I thought this was would be an interesting learning for myself, just to understand more about how parcels are kind of seen in Vermont.
How the sausage is made.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And my video will probably be off just because I have sketchy internet right now.
Cool.
Great. Kat, we were just introducing ourselves, where you work and what interests you about parcels.
Sure. So I'm Kat Bryers. I'm a planner at the Bennington County Regional Commission. And I work a lot with parcel data, creating maps, sharing information that's in parcel data with our member towns and residents. And so I think I know probably more than some, but I want to make sure that I'm not missing some basic information. I know it's somebody else in our office that actually pulls together and sends in parcel data regularly to VCGI, but I myself don't do it. So I'm not sure what the kind of what the protocols are. So I'm wondering if we're going to go through that.
Gotcha.
Awesome. And we just had Camilla. I don't know if your audio is on and ready. We're just introducing ourselves and our interest in parcel data. Their audio might.
I'm Camilla.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
Hi.
we can.
Okay.
Camilla, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Hi, I'm Camilla. I'm from Rockingham. Lister's
Welcome.
office. Yes.
Listers.
Sorry I'm
Great.
late.
That's okay.
Right on time.
Yes. All right,
So
Tim, I
thank
think
you
we're
everyone for going around, and it sounds like there's a bunch of listers and assessors, which is great because really without you all and the work that you do day in, day out, what I'm going to talk about will not continue to function as well as it could. And I'm also glad that folks like you, Kat, are here in terms of you being able to work with parcel data and provide products out of it, because what we at VCGI basically are, we're kind of like, we're map information librarians. And it often confuses people in the sense of they might ask us like, well, where's our map? Or can you make a map for us? And the short answer is usually no, but we curate and steward the information that folks can, other folks can use to make maps, including parcel information. So a lot of the visualizations that I'll show today are mostly exemplary of what you can do and what has been done and what's being done to date with parcel data across the state. But it's just sort of a key note. If you just forget about us, just think of it as like the map nerd librarians on behalf of the state of Vermont. That's pretty much what we do. I'm going to shift over to this PowerPoint. And I should say that I'm going to try and get through most of this without too many questions in between. And if you can, either save them for the end by asking by video, or enter them into the chat box, and both Sarah and myself will try and get through all of them. So can you all see the state of Vermont there, the slide? Okay. So it says here Vermont's most used GIS data. So the interesting thing about parcels is that it is far and away, or at least to this year, has been the most, just by sheer number of requests, the #1 used map data set in the state of Vermont. That's recently just been eclipsed by the state of Vermont's COVID data, which we also maintain at VCGI, believe it or not. But it's the point being, in normal times, most people are coming to us to look for parcel information. And that image on the right there of the entire state, the green squiggly lines, that is a snapshot of all of the parcels in the state as of December 2019, which was the first of its time when one could actually create a digital image of every single parcel in the state. So it's only very recently that we have had the capacity to show every single town across the state in coverage. And, you know, it represents over 300,000 parcels. That's how many are across the state of Vermont. It represents technically 255 towns, even though a handful of them are unincorporated. And it's 1/2 data sets that's this quilt of parcels across the whole state. And I say, well, 2 because of those, if any of you, definitely those of you who are listers know something called inactive parcels, which are sort of a bane in our existence from the mapping side of things. But we split those out from what are called active parcels and inactive parcels for a couple of reasons I'll get into later. So it's technically 2 different data sets, but the point being it's 1 snapshot of the whole state. Now the trick with that of trying to show all of Vermont in such a way is that historically and also to date, parcel maintenance, as you all know, probably, is the jurisdiction of each and every town, right? So you're seeing an animation there on the left of the individual towns whose primary responsibility is to map to their borders, right? And take care of what's in their window of attention. And another couple things come up here is one, I don't know if any of you have lived in the Western United States, but unlike there, where properties are usually rectangles or really nice shapes that are easy to mark, in Vermont, they're crazy shapes due to our topography, our history, all of that. So more or less, you're dealing with towns that have anywhere from a couple hundred to a couple thousand parcels in their jurisdiction. And never before, and then continue arguably to today, have they been asked to look even, understandably beyond their town boundaries, such that whole quilt of parcels on the right-hand side can be made. So what happens when we pull this all together and publish it, a lot of great new opportunities occur, but a lot of new challenges also present themselves when you're trying to stitch it all together. That animation will keep going through all the towns. We have it on our parcel program page if you get curious about it later. On the left-hand side of this image, prior to what was called the 3-year parcel project, which ran from 2017 to the end of 2019, there was only about just under a 60% match with individual parcels to the statewide grand list that you all submit to PVR at the tax department once every year. Lots of reasons for that, but one of which was that there was no actual standard or uniform way by which parcels had information associated with them digitally that made them actually able to be associated with the big table grand list as you lodge it once a year with tax. As of the 3-year parcel project, which was a largely federally funded effort to get all of the towns of Vermont up to a parcel data standard so that they could be joined with the grand list. We do now have that, right? So we have a 99% grand list match with every single parcel that's active with that annual grand list as submitted and published by PVR. And just most recently, a keynote here is that when I say grand list, I'm typically referring to, in all instances, the statewide grand list. That's the one of record for that annual cycle, rather than your dynamic local grand list that you're editing in real time, day in, day out. So as of September 2020, the latest statewide available grand list that all of this parcel information is joined with is the 2019 statewide grand list. That's the most recent one at a statewide level. Again, the key to doing all of this, and if there's one take home, particularly for assessors and listers, that you get from this, is that this all lives or dies by one unique identifier known as the SPAN, or the school property account number. That is the unique identifier that, as you know, when you go and you create a new parcel in your grand list management software, it assigns a unique ID known as the SPAN for that, for recording purposes. That little piece of information assigned with your map allows the map parcels to be joined with the records of the grand list. So if there's, again, one take home, just keep, if you can, SPAN information always associated with your parcels, because your local ID, your map ID, your parcel IDs, they do not carry across town boundaries. They are not unique. Every town does it differently. So the SPAN is really the key to all of this working. But in addition to that, really coordination across different jurisdictions like towns, RPCs, different state departments and agencies, all of us have some role to play in keeping this together, which I'll get into shortly. The big things I want to focus on are kind of around 4 or 5 brackets here. So I'm going to start with trying to, again, clarify what parcel data are, and importantly, what they are not. And I'll include in that description a bit of why they're important to maintain in such a way. What are the many uses that they offer? Not just us as professionals of different flavors who have something to do with knowing who owns what land where, but really the broader idea of parcel data as a public information resource. So those two will kind of go hand in hand. And then I'll kind of close up with who is responsible for this more partnership model now that we're into what's called this sustained parcel program, not the project, which is the ongoing maintenance effort for keeping parcel data up to date and useful. And try and help you understand a little bit about the timing of when updates are made in this free information resource we make available, and how to ultimately access and use this information. So I think go to this one. So this one here, just as I'm curious, have you can mention, turn your speaker on. Have any of you on the call used the Vermont Parcel Viewer as an application? Or heard of that? Nope. So this is good. So one of the things we make available, and I'll provide all these links later on where they live online, so you can go later and look at them, is a tool, lives in your web browser. So long as you have internet or cell access, should probably do at work at least, you can look at all the information we make readily available through something called the Vermont Parcel Viewer. You can probably find it through the first hit return on a Google search. And I'm just showing it here in this slide because it gives you an idea of what parcel data technically is. All it is that grand list table or attributes as you all submit once a year to tax, combined with the map geometry. And in tools like the Parcel Viewer, you can click an individual parcel and see in that little pop-up there just those attributes or those bits of information exactly as they are as you submit your final grand list for that year. So you'll see there's the span number there for that unique parcel, as well as all of the records just as they are within that grand list. And so you can look at one or many of these within this web interface tool. But just key to note that it's the map data plus the shapes themselves plus the grand list information associated. And the reason why that's important to note, or one reason why, is because that grand list table has a whole lot more information in it, as you know, than just simply owner, name, acreage, etc. Increasingly in the past couple of years, there's been a few more fields added to the statewide grand list itself, such as land use category. And that's an example of what's being shown on this slide here, is that you can look at not only who owns what by simply clicking on a parcel, but slightly more advanced uses are you can actually symbolize the map itself by any one of those attributes of interest. So again, if you wanted to see a cross-town view of how different towns are recording their land use categories, this is an example of that because it's in that grand list as associated with the map geometry itself. I should note just real quick on this slide, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse as I move around, but one key note here is you mentioned that the fabric of each individual town, as you stitch them together to make a statewide composite, you'll quickly notice that some towns do things differently, and that's the common norm, right? So you get one town here, I think we're around the Springfield area, mapping a parcel as woodland, whereas the adjacent parcel in the next town will have residential 1 or 2. And the question is, is that really the case? Maybe, maybe not, but there's no uniform way for doing this, and never before has it been so easy to actually look at this and say, how can we improve the way we categorize information? So that's just one of the both challenges and opportunities of having this kind of information available in such a way. Another is simply that it's now possible anywhere in Vermont, even in the most rural and sparsely populated areas, to have not just a 2-dimensional, but a 3-dimensional view of what's out there on the land, roughly speaking, for both planning and cartographic purposes. So this is a view of just GIS information that includes parcels as a foundational piece of that, as if you were in an airplane or from a bird's eye view, looking at downtown Montpelier, where you see parcels, you see aerial imagery, the elevation, topography, and contours. You see land cover products, which are the buildings in 3 dimensions themselves. This is incredibly useful if you're updating town plans, if you're trying to make decisions about where to invest within your communities. The point being is this information is available so long as you know where to find it, and you work with folks who know how to use it for particular purposes. But it's just a note to say that Parcels plays a key role in one of the foundational data sets that any place in Vermont now has available to them for planning and development purposes. And really, you can take that all the way down to the individual parcel scale, where it's now really possible to construct a virtual Vermont, at least at a snapshot in time, for reference. So this is an example, again, of a parcel along the Winooski in downtown Montpelier that was just recently built out as a public transit center, mixed-use development with housing above. That model in the middle and the bottom was situated right into the parcel and along the buildings and the other GIS data to actually see the context, right? To see what some proposed change in your community might look like. And all this information, again, is readily available, freely available for that to be done and evaluated as you consider what changes to make in your own communities. So again, it's just a giant leap forward, and Parcels has played a big part of that, of what map information is now out there. Before I go into fancy things, that's one of the fancier ways of using parcel information. Step back a little bit and think about, just from a pure assessment aid perspective, one of the more common uses and inquiries, both from professionals like listers, assessors, as well as the general public, is, I want to find out where my rough acreage, or I want to look at the corner points, coordinates of what property I own. And this is an example where we publish parcel data in a variety of ways. You can get the raw information, or you can look at it in like what's called the interactive map viewer here, which is another map tool, and use tools that are built into that to do what right now you're seeing an animation of taking the measurement of the acreage as drawn there. And you see it shows up 2.9 acres, 1,500. So that's just another key way of using parcel data that many folks have begun using. I will use that to say that there is a difference between grand listed acreage and GIS or map acreage. And we can get into that in the Q&A or questions. We strip out the map acreage because it really does not match the grand list acreage, as you can imagine. So there are caveats with this, but it's also, from a professional assessor standpoint, helpful to begin to calibrate where you might be able to make adjustments in knowing how much you're off or on with the map acreage as it's drawn in the map versus what the record in the grand list says. One of the key instances, as we're all probably experiencing now, doing this virtually, that makes this simple, what and why, is town offices for a big part have been closed, right? So they would normally have to go in and get paper maps to find any of this information out. They couldn't do that due to COVID. Now, it's available anywhere in Vermont. You can go from your computer and look at this information, at least to get a start at the reference information that you may then have to go to the town or contact the town for the most recent or current example of said information. So it really has been helpful in instances where people haven't had a chance, for many reasons, to get in person to a town office. Back to other more advanced uses of parcel data, again, because it has both qualitative and quantitative aspects, right? So you have the like categories of what something is classed as, but you also have the numeric values of information assigned with the grand list as well. And you can do assessments of, for example, you're looking at southern Vermont, again, as if you were from a plane, and those aren't buildings, but they are extruded polygons of an assessment of the common level of appraisal adjusted value per acre. So it's a way of visualizing how much a parcel is worth per its size, right? And the story that it tells is that, oh, actually our downtowns, like you can see, this is in the bottom right-hand corner, this is Brattleboro, and up here you can see Stratton Mountain condominiums. You can see development patterns that you weren't possibly able to see. This is a very advanced use of parcel data, but the point being is you could do economic assessments either locally or regionally to never before extents with this information. You can also do things like clarify what's at stake for emergency management. So we're looking at a tool that also has parcel data called the Agency of Natural Resources Atlas that has some pre-populated layers within it, one of which are FEMA's flood map information, right? So we're looking at in there in the red, that's the designated flood zone areas by the Federal Emergency Management Administration. And you can see that this whole parcel in question here in Montpelier is within that floodplain, but two different parts of it, right? The more severe striped area versus the more longer term flood area above. So anywhere where this other information is available, you can look at the parcel level in relation to this kind of information. You can also, in less developed areas, use it to increase the ability of your other mapped information to be accurate, right? So one of the most common things in Vermont is to know where the public wells are. And this animation is merely showing that Agency of Natural Resources had it on record down in the bottom right that there was this well S624148 that they had thought was way out in the middle of nowhere in the Green Mountains somewhere, actually was to be located with a parcel in town closest to that forest edge, but they couldn't associate that without first sending someone out in the middle of nowhere to not find that well. But because the way the records are construed, they can cross-reference the ownership with that parcel information and properly locate that. So that wasn't before possible without standardized grand list information. And where this is all possibly going down the road is, imagine if you were sitting in your home office or in your real office once we get back to doing that on a regular basis, and you can click a parcel anywhere in the state of Vermont and pull up whether or not it's got an Act 250 permit on it, both now and in the past, whether it has applicable state or local regulations. You can begin to think of parcels as a unit that you can attach other information with. So this has already begun right now at the state level with the scoping out of ways to get current use maps associated with parcels so that you can do just that. You'll be able to click on anywhere in the state and see if there has been a current use map lodged with that parcel in question. Other down the road opportunities along those lines would be, as I mentioned, if there's any permits or regulations required for that parcel in question. So again, parcel isn't just about ownership, it's about all kinds of things you can assign or associate with it. Everything from urban design and planning and zoning to regulatory purposes to who's simply filled out some form that's required of them that's related with that parcel in question. So that's all, like, you know, a really quick high level overview of some of the wonderful things that parcel data allow us to do. At the same time, while that's out there, most of the questions we get on a regular basis are relative to what parcel data actually are not. So the number one thing is they're not a ground survey. They are primary purpose is a reference tool at first to point you or lead you more easily into the official record, which is still to this day the land records associated with a parcel in question that reside with the municipality. They are not perfect spatial representations of what's on the ground, nor will they ever be. I'll get into an instance here of a common occurrence that we see in Vermont, which is at the border of two different towns. But another common one is you might see a line cutting through a garage. If you look at that on top of an aerial photograph, you wonder, why is that line cutting through this building? There's lots of reasons for that, but the take home is that parcel data are not intended to be a survey grade representation of what's on the ground. That's always what we wish to go and move towards, but there are many reasons why that isn't currently nor possibly ever going to be a perfect case. And the last point, the thing that parcel data are not, they're not an official source of those grand list attributes. They are a reference. Again, they're a snapshot in time of a statewide grand list. They don't, at the time, at least, reflect those, you know, moving day in, day out local grand list attributes that are probably more up to date with the town in question directly through your grand list management software. There is some change happening on that front as well, where that time period between that annual update of attributes as well, and the day in, day out management of grand list will start to reflect each other, but that's not currently anything more than a 1-year snapshot. So they're not the final end all be all source. They're a place of starting off. So I'm going to use an example here in that top right image there of how Parcel Data has some challenges with spatial accuracy between the towns of Sharon and Norwich. You'll see that the blue and the red arrows are pointing out a discrepancy between where two towns are claiming a shared area. And the question is, well, who's owning it? Is that person who owns that parcel getting 2 tax bills? In this instance, they are, right? They didn't know that until they were able to look at each other's map parcels on top of each other. And if you take a statewide look at this, which we only have been able to do since December of last year, you find out in this map that many areas are either doubly claimed or completely unclaimed, right? So the funny joke the joke we make in the office is like, if you wanted to go build a cabin and not have anyone claiming this parcel of land out in the middle of the woods, you would use this map to go out and find out an unclaimed sliver of land. It doesn't mean that. It means that it's just not mapped as a correctly owned parcel, but it's definitely lodged or represented in the grand list somewhere. And it's merely emphasizing that the way that taking account of who owns what where to date, both through maps and mostly through the grand list, has not been able to actually reconcile this level of understanding until we've had this resource available to know where are we doubly claiming, where are we unclaimed, such that these kinds of things can be worked out between property owners, towns themselves moving forward. And I should also say that inactive parcels, which are the parcel in shared ownership or single ownership of 2 abutting parcels and gets assigned 1 tax bill, they're not uniformly requested by the state, and therefore they're done and recorded differently, or if at all, across all towns in Vermont. And obviously from the local level, you would want to have that information included in your map and stacked in there, because it's the most fine-grained, smallest scale geometry assigned with a parcel. But there are many reasons why you wouldn't want to include that as the same layer, because again, they are technically not being tracked in the same way that an active parcel is. So we split those out. This is merely to show that there are some difficulties in trying to obtain this information uniformly from each town when the tax department and the rest of the state doesn't ask you to do so. So it's one of the caveats and challenges of trying to do this work across the state. And a more local fine-grained example of that is when you get into condominiums, right? Because maps have been considered not digitally, but paper products to date in many instances. An old byproduct of that was that you would get map vendors or contractors drawing the shapes of individual buildings to represent condominium ownership, when technically that shouldn't be done. Those aren't parcels, they're merely percentage ownership of a common parcel of land. So we've run into all of these new things that are being surfaced by first primarily just doing this digitally and then doing it across the state. So these are areas for improvement that we will be working with both vendors and towns in the months and years ahead to improve. Now, that being said, I just mentioned vendors and towns and how this is a partnership model. It's really about multiple parties who have different sections of responsibility for keeping all this as a useful resource. So you're looking there at that's a regional planning commission up in Northwest Vermont. Their whole area of coverage, for example, RPCs are, or development corporations are, in between us at the state, the towns themselves, and making sure that this kind of information is both found useful as well as you get it clearer what it can be used for. So all of these parties have a role to play. What's changing relative to how it used to be done in Vermont is that, basically by hook or crook, VCGI would have to basically by luck ask the towns or the vendors, like, can you please give us your parcel data? Sometimes they would send it to us, other times we wouldn't. That's in part why we had partial coverage across the state. And then eventually we would do our thing and make it publicly available for all these different uses. Where things are going now is more of a cycle affair, where because this is something that we now have relationships more steady established with the parcel data vendors that towns hire, as well as the listers and assessors and other professional groups like development corporations and RPCs. It's really about finding out how everyone in that cycle of maintenance knows what parts they play and what they don't have to concern themselves with. And pull from this information and provide back to it. And the one key parts that there's a couple of key parts in this new proposed model for how we keep this information up to date that I want to highlight. And that's mostly down in the bottom right side, which is sort of the state of Vermont state government side of things, which is what we at VCGI, the tax department, and other state partners have in the works currently. And there's this acronym here called IPTMS, which is the Integrated Property Tax. About briefly here, but long story short, if you haven't heard of this, this is basically going to be the new NIMRIC software that you use locally to maintain your municipal grand list. So that whole interface that you're dealing with regularly to make changes for every record will eventually be replaced by a web-based model that itself, for the first time, has built-in mapping functionality, right? So you can at least see a parcel right in your terminal as you maintain the grand list. You can see the parcel in question that an individual record is dealing with, right? You won't be able to go in there and make geometry changes, et cetera, but you'll be able to more closely associate that information. And we are partnering with the selected vendor as well as the tax department there to make sure that the parcel map data that we collect and publish every year, or even in between yearly updates geometry-wise, that's what's driving these maps that are going to be inside the new grand list management software. So within the next year or two, you're going to be hearing a lot more about this if you haven't begun so already, about what the additional functionality that will be. But just know that we're working with those parties to make sure that they're going to be consuming our parcel data. And so that cycle becomes more readily apparent of why it's important to keep it up to date if possible.
And I want to mention we're actually doing one of these, a Knowledge Bites webinar with the Department of Taxes in December 17th, and they're gonna go over an update of this management system.
Perfect. Good. So that's another chance to hear about that there. And I'll share this slideshow with Sarah if you're interested. All these links there, it says learn more about IPTMS here. Those are hyperlinks to different websites that you can go check out if you're interested. Another thing that we're trying to do is make more robust our reporting tools. So this is an example of a map that we update a couple times a year of what our known map vendor capacity is for every town across Vermont. So it'll be something like where myself or a colleague of mine will call Val and say, hey, are you still working with CAI this year? And are you anticipating working them for 1 or 2 or 3 years? And you know, when do you expect your updates to be? And that way we basically can begin to put back out a record of our understanding of what the towns are doing or not doing, so that we can be more transparent about what data in each town is represented and why. So again, these links are all going to be from our website, vcgi.vermont.gov, but it's another example of a web browser-based map that you can go look at now or when you have time to see what our current records are for each town. And if you see something wrong in your town, feel free to let me know. We'll make the change. The last thing that we're doing that I want to share today about how to keep all of this more integrated is just is something called the Vermont Land Survey Library, which as of this year, 2020, was a statewide, both two things, new law as well as a new online resource for requiring a digital copy of a survey as performed by a licensed Vermont land surveyor to be sent to this online tool, this online map as a record for when a boundary line change has occurred. So what that means is you see the parcel data layer there on your screen. We're looking at a place in Killington right here. This surveyor, Richard Luna, has come in and performed a subdivision there. That's why it's a purple image on this map. And if you click those attachments there, what they've done is assigned an actual PDF copy of that survey right on the map, so you can click it and see what is being slated as changed. Those digital copies of surveys, we make a sweep of those periodically every year and have a record whether or not those were included in a town update as submitted by vendors. So basically, it's a backstop for us to keep track of geometry changes. We're not talking about the attributes of the grand list changes. Now we're talking about how do we keep track of when there's been geometry changes for towns. And this is one way of doing that. There's a lot obviously to talk about here, but I don't want to go too far, so we can get to that later if you're curious. But the URL for that is landsurvey.vermont.gov. Key question that we always get asked is when are parcels updated, right? Well, as you probably all know, parcels, it's not simple one singular thing. You've got the map geometry, you've got the grand list, and then you got this pesky property transfer data that changes really quickly, right? So out of these three, property transfer data is like the rabbit, right? That can, every week there's a new list published by the tax department of every property transfer, your PTTRs as they call them, that goes live. And that's, out of these three that are associated with parcels, the quickest, most rapidly changing information. Relative to that, the statewide grand list is a turtle. It's really slow. It's once a year official, as stamped, right? And then geometry is like an alligator. It could be either be fast or slow, depending the parcel in question, right? It could not change in a very long time. Say if you're somewhere in the Northeast Kingdom and there's just no change in the way the map looks, or you can be a place like downtown Burlington. There's subdivisions and all kinds of stuff going on, right? So each of these has different characteristics with answering that question, how are parcels updated? The short answer was what it means for the things that we provide is that geometry, the map shapes, are updated for each town after we receive them from their respective updating entity, which in most cases is a vendor that's hired by the town. So we have a web form portal that we have made all of the vendors aware of, that they go and they log in. Once they've gone through their update cycle with you at the town, you signed off on it, they send us the digital data via that form. We look at it and then it gets rolled into our update cycle as it arrives to us. So that's a periodic thing we do out over the course of the year as we receive them. The grand list attributes, however, are only always updated once a year for every town. So again, 2019 being the most recent available statewide grand list, that's what all of those towns are now joined with. And then next spring, when the 2020 statewide grand list is, all of the statewide towns get joined with them. So that's the short answer when we update parcels. We do not currently associate property transfer data with parcels. That's something that's just far too fast moving at the time being for associating with an individual parcel level. That might change in the future, but for now, that's how it is. There's a link here, a longer explanation that gets into the weeds of when parcels are updated on our website in the FAQ section. That's a good segue into all of these. We have resources, everything from different tools that you can use, like the parcel map viewer that I was mentioning before, just simply go out and look at the parcel data over top of an aerial image. We've got example uses of parcel data. We've got the links to those maps about the town data status, our known map vendors, the survey libraries linked in here. We also do things like provide just abstract or contract language guidance for you at the town level. If you're thinking about renewing your contract with your map vendor, some things to look out for if you needed that. We make sort of boilerplate or template contract language available. And we also provide guidance documents for said vendors about working with us in the parcel program in particular, about how that whole update process works, how we go through submissions and checks, et cetera. So there's a whole bunch of resources linked from all of these here that we can share out with you afterwards. This is perhaps your primary resource. This is what's called the parcel program page on our VCGI website. You can get there from going to vcgi.vermont.gov, and then up in the top left there, you see parcel program is underneath the data and program section. There's a really thorough description on this page it's really regularly updated with all these who, what, when, where, how, why questions that we've been going over. There's also, like a 7,000 word too long FAQ of all these commonly asked questions we get, with a lot of visual examples of how to do specific things that are in there. And then there is also links right here in the top. You can see these buttons: view parcel data and access parcel data. The view goes to the parcel viewer, and the access goes to what's called the Vermont Open Geodata portal for those who want the raw information to work with to create map products. So all these are linked right from that parcel program page. And this is just an example of using an application like the parcel viewer. If you knew a span anywhere in Vermont, you can enter it in that search bar in the top left. You zoom in to the parcel in question. You say you wanted to know the 2 abutting parcels there. You can use the select tool. It says press down and start, let go and finish. You can just drag this tool and it'll select those parcels in question. And you can open the attribute table and show how to display those associated grand list records with those parcels. So again, this is a tool that some of you hire contractors for, which is obviously worth doing if you want to keep it more up to date, but we also make this tool readily available for anywhere in Vermont, knowing that not all towns are contracting for these kinds of services. So it's just another way of getting access to the information. If you're of the good fortune of having cell phone data access in Vermont, which we know isn't common, you can also use tools like the parcel viewer while you're out in the field to watch the little blue dot move around on the map while you look at parcel lines. So as an example, you get access to any of this information if you're in the field by enabling what's called your location services on your phone, right? You can go out, there's that little blue dot, I selected allow. It's showing me my location here in town. And I can also select the attributes by just clicking with my finger on a parcel there and seeing that sort of while I'm out and about. Lots of folks love this use. More people are asking about this than I had expected, so that's why it's in here. But it's, again, another type of thing that if you're with the data access, you can also use something like the parcel viewer to look at. If you don't have data access in the field, there's also many ways you can use different tools to create offline maps that still show your location. We have some info on our website of how to go about that as well. And then this is just an overview of what's called the parcel page. This is where the raw data lives. This is where we publish everything. It's kind of the clearinghouse of information on what's called the Vermont Open Geodata portal. So I think with that, I'm just going to sort of end and wrap up here saying it's really about, knowing what parcel data is and is not, and suggesting that, span is the most important piece of information that we need to maintain here on out, and trying to adjust the expectations of all parties involved here of what parcel data is, its currentness, what it can be used for, what it's not best to be used for, and trying to make sure that, we keep you in the loop of what we're doing with parcel data and vice versa. If you have questions about it, you know how to contact. You can reach out to me or my colleagues at VCGI. We like hearing from you with questions about, what's the update cycle? How can we make sure that our town is reflected as most up to date? We're happy to engage those kinds of questions. So I just want to make sure that that's one of the other take-home points here. And if you need to contact me, you can do so. My email is just my name at vermont.gov, and you can find us at vcgi.vermont.gov down below. So that's a ton of information. So I'll sort of be quiet now. If anyone's got questions, feel free to chime in.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away, or you can type it into the chat box, whatever function works best for you. Camilla?
Yep, Camilla here. I may be repeating you, but I want to make absolutely sure I understand that updates to this statewide data are going to be between the vendors and VCGI. So as a lister, can I just count on vendors taking care of this and I don't have to I don't have any specific role to play here? Is what it sounds like.
Yeah, your role to play typically, the short answer would be yes.
Okay.
Your role most often is validating or verifying their work should they ask you. Can you confirm that these are correct? These are the changes that have been made this year or whatever time period. And once you've signed off on that, we are contacting with vendors to say, okay, you've completed your work for said town, now submit to us. So yes, our primary instance is going through the vendors to get those updates, not the listers and assessors.
And are there deadlines involved between the vendors and you?
Come again?
Are there deadlines, time requirements for them to submit this kind of information?
There are not, basically, because we have right now, no contractual relationship with them. We basically take it when they get it. And most of the vendors to date have been doing it because they don't want to forget about it. And it's easiest to do so almost shortly after they click submit, to the town in question.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Val, go ahead.
I'm on a border town with the state of New York.
Yep.
I wondered if VCGI is doing any kind of work with states and countries surrounding Vermont about getting parcel data for maybe 1 or 2 parcels in to those states. If I'm in Montpelier and I have land in, I don't know, whatever's just to the north, I can use this map. I can see the whole parcel. If I have land in Rupert, I have land in Salem, New York, it stops at the Vermont border.
Correct.
Is there any kind of working with the surrounding states to get parcel data?
So Val, I remember you asked this exact question at the VALA conference last week. And you probably got an unfortunate answer then, and you're probably getting an unfortunate answer now, which is we have no control over what New York or Canada does. And right. I should say that New York in particular, what we do know is they're trying to catch up with where we've been in Vermont. They don't have a statewide parcel map at the state level. They have it town by town or county by county in their instance. I know they're working on it right now, and what would be required to do that would be, one, they complete a statewide data set that we now are fortunate enough to have in Vermont, and they make it available publicly, as we do, as what's called a data service. That's more or less a fancy term for it's a URL we can enter in our map applications to display, say, New York parcel data as a layer that you can turn off and on inside something like the parcel viewer. That's technically possible, but it's not, they don't have it ready on their side. And if it were to become ready, we would definitely consider that, but that's kind of a prerequisite to do so.
I'm just asking because I know there's more than just Rupert. There's the whole west, southern,
and
eastern.
New Hampshire as well, right? And yeah, Massachusetts, correct.
And Canada.
Yep. Yep.
So I just wondered, hoping actually.
Yeah. I mean, Massachusetts fortunately has statewide coverage, which it's, technically it's something we could consider now. New Hampshire and New York do not. So it's something, right, we have typically a big once a year meeting with other state GIS councils, and these are the kinds of things that are considered at them.
Okay. Great. Anyone else? Paul, Helen, Peter?
I have a question. This is Kat at BCRC. Since I have the regional view down here in Bennington County, I can instantly think of all the towns and all the specific areas where those boundaries aren't lining up. And now that those have been identified, through this process, are there conversations about what next steps could be taken to help reconcile those over time? I'm assuming that the impetus remains with individual municipalities if they want to address those inconsistencies.
Yep, that's a great question, and the short answer is it's just beginning of guidance that we're offering on that front. So there's 2 parts to it. One is making sure we have somewhere to go for towns where we say essentially look at on your year-on-year change, a prioritized list of like really needs attention to maybe can not need attention this update cycle, And how would you develop a prioritized list of like perhaps the most egregious offenders, right? Maybe there's a parcel that's got 100 acres that's doubly claimed across your adjacent town or something like that that you can see in this. That might take priority over one that's got a 0.5 acreage discrepancy between the map acreage and the grand list acreage. Where that though is going to become more apparent universally is in this integrated property tax management system. We expect that grand list management software tool that all towns are going to be using. There's going to be a bunch of built-in analysis tools that are inside of that, some of which are map-based. And so you'll be able to click, presumably easily, a button and look at largest differences between, say, the grand list record and the map information, and then show them up on a map. That would go a long way to helping people shorten the amount of time that it takes to know what to prioritize, right? So I think we're hinging a lot on, once that new service is set up, between having these reporting tools and capabilities built into them so that they're not, having to develop the expertise of going down and making, an assessment or an analysis of what to prioritize. In the time between now and then, though, it would be trying to figure out the biggest offenders and add them to your list for potential annual changes. And then that gets submitted to their vendor in question.
Okay. I have a nerdy GIS question, which is the slide where you were talking about tax yield per acre. I've wanted to create those kind of graphics for towns in our region for a while now, and I don't know what tool. I'm assuming it's just a GIS, maybe spatial analyst tool that you can use to make that. Do you know? Yeah,
it's unfortunately crazy complicated, but if you want, I can put you in touch with my colleague David, who's a whiz and he's very helpful. And if he can probably at least clarify if it's worth going down that route or not. But if you, David Fox is his name, I can mention if you want to reach out to him via email.
That would be great. Yeah, because it's the kind of thing that I've done enough Googling about it that it's clear that if it were really easy, I would have figured it out by now. But
yeah,
it actually does it. If they can give me the real skinny on just how hard it is, that'll be really helpful. So I can just reach out to him.
Yep. Yep. He'll give you a sense of what's at play.
Thanks.
Great. Well, I just want to be mindful of our time. It is 1:02. So if there are any other questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. Thanks, Tim. This was super informative. And I don't ever use Parcel Data, so.
No worries.
Yeah, this is great. And thank you everyone for joining. And again, this is recorded. So once it's, whatever, downloaded, I can send the link out and share it with you if you want to review. And then Tim, you said you'd be willing to share your PowerPoint, so I can also share that with people.
Yeah, because it has a lot of hyperlinks in it. So I'll send a flattened PDF of that to you. Great. So they'll still function.
Okay, wonderful. All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, take care.
Bye.
Good to see you, Camilla.
All right, take care, everyone.